headphones when they don't work. Okay, well, welcome to OccupyRadio.net. My hair's a little disheveled. I should wear a band up here. So this is pretty big week coming up for you. I mean, in the middle of this pandemic, there are a lot of people in serious trouble. Can you tell the audience basically what's going to happen this coming Friday?
Yeah, so this coming Friday, May 1st, is marking International Workers' Day, which historically is the day on which working class people celebrated their heritage as a common group of people across borders, races, and gender. And it also has a special significance in the United States, especially since new life was breathed into May Day in 2006 by the immigrant rights movement. And another added layer of significance is that May 1st is also the day that our President Trump is trying to reopen the economy in the midst of this deadly COVID-19 pandemic. So on this day, workers and activists, immigrants, and a broad cross-section of people in New York City have coordinated May Day 2020, the Fight for Our Lives, which will be a series of actions to show solidarity with people working on the front lines, to demand personal protective equipment for people on the front lines, and to fight back against the push to reopen this economy in such a manner that's callous and disregards people's lives and well-being.
Yeah, it is very callous, and it's their worry about the economy. That's all they care about is the economy. But if the people are dead, there's no need for an economy.
Well, that's clearly a risk they're willing to take with our lives. And we're standing up to say no, that we won't let you put profits before working people.
Right. Now, can you specify some of the other actions other than the Caravan?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, if I can speak briefly about the Caravan,
sure.
Because the Caravan, originally the idea was that we would have one caravan leaving from Brooklyn and traveling through different parts of the city. And what has come about is that given that Queens and the Bronx have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19, we have the Caravan will actually be in three parts, starting from the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn, all converging at one point in Manhattan. So that's what the Caravan looks like. In addition to the Caravan, we're asking people who are not able to come outside because of social distancing measures, people who might be immunocompromised or have comorbidities, to take actions such as taking a selfie with a placard in support of May Day. We also have a Facebook frame you can use that would put something across your screen that says, you're supporting the May Day 2020 action. We're asking people to wear red if you are going to work or if you are coming to the protest. And one exciting development is that we recently touched base with Chris Smalls, who is the Amazon worker who was recently fired for his activism at the Staten Island JFK 8 depot there, and he will be organizing an action outside of Amazon, and that's something we're also encouraging people to attend and show support for.
Great. Now, is all of this on a website so people could view the information?
Right. So we have a Facebook page, the May Day Action for Our Lives, if people want to find us. We're also on Twitter at New York City Fight. And we also have a Medium page, May Day 2020.
Okay, great. And I know when you had the meeting, I think it was Sunday.
Right.
It was undecided what those routes were going to, the landmarks in those routes were going to be. Has that been decided yet, or?
So as of this morning, it's not been finalized. So each borough has a subcommittee that's coming up with the routes because the people in the boroughs know best, right? And I think part of it is that they're trying to pick locations where people have suffered, like detention centers, juvenile detention centers, where the city has said, for example, we're going to take all of the youth who are under juvenile detention and place them in one detention center, pretty much creating a hive and a vector for the disease. Places like that want to be targeted, but we're waiting for each borough to finalize the list, and some of it is, of course, to maintain the element of surprise being kept on the hush hush.
Right, right. And that's why I was almost hesitant to even talk about some of the issues. One of the things, though, that I think that came out of the meeting was that you were going to stay away from hospitals because you didn't want to impede the
Yeah.
traffic to the hospitals. Is that still true?
Well, it's still true, but the condition that we will make an exception if we're in touch with any staff at the hospital, right?
Yeah.
That says, please come by and show solidarity with us. And no, you will not present an obstacle to vehicles, to emergency vehicles trying to access the emergency room. So once we have that clearance and go ahead, then we would feel comfortable and safe in showing solidarity with hospital workers through the car caravan, because it's very important that we distinguish ourselves, right, from these right-wing anti-lockdown protesters who've been using the same tactic of a car caravan. And any rally we do ask people to come to, if we ask you to go to Staten Island, we ask you to wear your mask, wear gloves, wear personal protective equipment. If you don't have any, we'll try to source some for you. And the same thing with the ending rally in Manhattan, which will be a combination of cars, bikes, and people. We ask people to maintain social distancing, and there will, of course, be people from the organizing team helping to enforce those, because people's health is a priority at this time.
I live in Red Hook. This is coming out of Red Hook. And I was out yesterday, and I was really surprised in how many people were wearing masks. I think I walked to the post office, which is about 4 blocks away, and there was only one person that wasn't wearing a mask. So
That is
it was
very
good to see that. How did you get involved with this whole event?
Well, I saw the call that was put out. So we're responding in New York City to the general call for a general day of action that was put out by a group, Cooperation Jackson and Black Socialists of America. And in New York City, a few activists from different parts, different spectrums of the left have gotten together in a united front effort to temporarily put aside our differences to say that this is an important event we need to work on to highlight what's been happening below the radar. Like I can say, like, so I was involved in organizing with my job. I'm a child protective specialist supervisor with the city's Administration for Children's Services. So myself and my coworkers, we were particularly concerned about the agency's reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is that we hadn't been supplied with enough personal protective equipment. Some people hadn't been supplied with any. And that's an ongoing situation. I can say, for example, since this crisis started, I've been provided with expired hand sanitizer, which when I complained was replaced, and one surgical mask, which, if you're paying attention to CDC guidelines, is supposed to be disposable and used only once.
Exactly. Yeah.
But nonetheless, we're still being asked to conduct home visits, right? So it's not that we don't want to do our job protecting children and strengthening families. We don't want to become vectors to the disease as we move from our homes to the subways, to our offices, to our families' homes, to another family's home, and then back to our own families or back to the office. So we're particularly concerned in that regard. And when I heard there were people organizing a citywide effort, I felt the onus was on me to jump in to do what I can.
That's great. That's great. That was one of the issues, though, that I was concerned about with the census that is in the process. But I don't think people have been knocking on doors yet. But that's down the road.
Right, but the census at least has sensibly suspended door-to-door activity, right? Whereas the New York State Office of Children and Family Services hasn't issued an order like that as yet. So our agency in the city that falls under them, we're continuing to make visits. In my department that works with families involved in the court system, we're pushed back to making visits only once a month, and in some places over video calls. But the people who respond to immediate reports are still required to A, work in the office some days a week, which poses dangers of its own, and B, to conduct home visits as usual. And, you know, like my coworkers are tough, sturdy people. This is a very hard job. Not a lot of people stay in it, but we're scared for our health and our lives, because we're not given the equipment needed. So we have to source the equipment through solidarity networks, right? So like a lot of my coworkers have put in requests with New York City Makes PPE.com, which is a group of people who are sewing masks, gowns, making face shields for frontline workers. And and they've been very good and responsive to us, but they've also been a little confused. They're like, "You do what? You do where?" And they didn't give you what?
Yeah, it really is difficult to understand, and how agencies can be people can be put in those situations. But there's so much, the people are so lax in preparing for things. It's really ridiculous.
And I
It's
mean, like, I
not
guess it
done.
depends on also how it personally affects you, right? So I found out about deaths at my agency, sadly, in the newspaper. When the Daily News published an article about 100 city workers who had passed, there was a blurb in there at the Administration for Children's Services. The spokesman informed us that 4 workers had passed away from COVID-19. Hundreds were symptomatic, and hundreds had no 100 something were symptomatic, and 100 something had tested positive. And I was like, wow, no one communicated this to me. And we get a daily email from our commissioner.
Yeah.
So our commissioner is sending us a daily inspiration with quotes from inspirational leaders. But
Yeah, so you go back out on the
right,
street.
at no point have they come out to say, oh, someone in your office has tested positive, and like there's ways to do it to maintain privacy, but what we're seeing now is a lack of transparency. And it's, at least to me, that's how it feels. My personal opinion is that it's deliberate. And since those 4 deaths were published in the newspaper, I can speak to 4 more that have happened since. And very scarily, 2 of them have happened with staff at the ACS Children's Center, which is a residential facility where kids await placement after being removed from their parents. And that's a place you don't want developing into a vector for transmission, right? Because in addition to people who work there 24/7, there's children who live there 24/7. It's next door to Bellevue Hospital, right? And what we really need is an honest, transparent conversation. And we really need the agency to say that these people's lives matter. I know at least 3 of the people of the last 4 who've passed away. And it's like incredible to know that these people who were otherwise in good health, people that you've seen recently, some of the most friendly people are gone like that.
There's an old age home, a senior center, not far from here, where 55 people died in this one building.
Yeah.
I was astounded. I mean, it was in the neighborhood that I grew up in, so
Right.
I was very familiar with it. But plus, I know people that are living there.
To me, it's really important that we push back against this new normal, right? Like, we don't want to live in a society where nursing homes have turned into morgues, which is what is happening de facto, where the city medical examiner can't even perform autopsies, where people can't even have burials in their religious traditions, that you have to just rush and cremate people. You can't even mourn the dead properly in this society we're living in. And instead of a real solution, what we're seeing is, okay, the mayor is fighting the governor is fighting the president, and they're all trying to say that we're the good guys in this and you're the bad guys. But at the end of the day, if you're living in New York City, especially if you're living in places in Queens, the Bronx, if you're living in East New York, Brooklyn, like I am, or Brownsville, if you're in public housing, these are not situations where you have time to quibble. What people need is action to save our lives.
There's NYCHA buildings a block away from here, and I have some friends that live there, and they're just not getting the services that
Right.
they really need. I mean, just imagine if the elevator was working. If it's working, people keep pushing those buttons all day long.
Right.
There's
And
no one there to clean those buttons.
right. And if you live up on the 12th floor, the elevator is your only option, right?
Yeah.
If you're asthmatic, you're not going to climb 12 floors. But the inaction from the government is why we're taking action on Friday to save our own lives. Like, we need and want people to realize that at the end of the day, we working people, the immigrants who work in kitchens everywhere, the transit workers who drive the trains, those of us who do social work, not trying to leave any set of workers out, domestic workers, essential and non-essential workers make this city run.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that we hold the power in this situation, because there's really a culture of fear that's gripped us even before COVID-19 became a pandemic, where people were afraid to stand up for themselves, to say, we've had enough with this situation. We've had enough with a president that doesn't take pandemic seriously. We've had enough with a governor and mayor who were more interested in beefing with each other than providing real solutions. So like May Day 2020 is a day for people to come back and take control of their own lives, to plug in, and really and truly, you're able to, even if you're not coming to this protest, if you're in a workplace, it takes you and your coworkers getting together to say, we are a safety committee. I got an email today about some coworkers who did this. They got together and said, hey, excuse me, management, we understand that you're trying to do the best you can, but it's not enough. People are dying. What is your solution? And just like that, they're beginning to get results. So, and we're seeing people even outside of what we're organizing on May 1st. And we, of course, want to promote this. There's people organizing rent strikes. There's people trying to organize for people behind bars, because people behind bars, they can't escape COVID-19. One person brings it into a prison, a juvenile detention center, an immigration detention center, and then it spreads around like wildfire. So we're making sure the voices of those people are heard, and we're also standing in solidarity with them to say that they have the power. We want those people freed now. We don't want to get into debates about safety and public safety, because clearly, look around us. This is government can we say they give a damn about people's public safety?
Obviously not. And this is one moment in history. I mean, I'm a lot older than you, but there's never been a time in my life where the average person has had this much power. And I just hope that we make good use of it and not let it pass us by. Workers should be going out on strike, as you said. Tenants should be striking because of the damn high rents in the city. It's ridiculous that people are having to work 2 and 3 jobs to be able to pay their rent.
Right. I mean, and part of it is that, the United States government, of course, it's in an economic crisis, but it still has a massive amount of resources. And we need to say these resources should not be used to carry out the usual repressive things that are happening, right? The idea that people are getting pulled over for minor traffic infractions, or that people are still getting detained by ICE and deported in the middle of a global pandemic just shows the priorities our society has. And it shows the need to reorder those priorities as urgently as possible. Like, this is not talking about, building some kind of socialism in the 22nd century. This is us talking about how can the world survive this pandemic without losing more people.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm concerned with is, after this is all over with, we all know what's going to happen. Large corporations are going to begin to lay off people so they can bring their profits in line. All 3 levels of government are going to begin to cut programs that we really need. We need to be able to stand up to that. And I hope this pandemic has brought the people together to be able to fight those fights.
Yeah, that's what I hope. And that's the thing. We're organizing for May Day, but we don't want it to be a dead end action that doesn't build infrastructure for future movements. I would like to see the first of every month be a place where people come together, share stories, and build ways in which we can fight back concretely in New York City, in this country, and even worldwide against what we have in common. And what we have in common is what you mentioned, what the government is going to do and has been doing, which is to institute these austerity measures, right? They're going to try to cut back on our pensions. Like, this is Mitch McConnell's idea in saying, oh, let the states file bankruptcy. Well, any state that files bankruptcy, it means cutting into public workers' pensions, which is something the Republicans have been trying to do for a very long time, and something the Democrats have not been fighting them on effectively. So we don't want cuts to pensions. We don't want cuts to wages. We don't want cuts to the existing healthcare system. In fact, we need the opposite, right? We need to stop introducing new tiers to the pensions. We need Medicare for all, or another form of universal healthcare, one that's inclusive of undocumented people, right? And we need increases in our pay. We need cost of living adjustments. We need to not have a pittance of $1,200 given to some people. The government has hilariously deposited my stimulus money into a closed bank account, right? Like, we need a society that's organized around people's needs, not profit. And May Day, we can take one step in that direction, but every first of the month, until we get concrete actions that can save people's lives and guarantee us a future free from this pestilence that's flying around, that is touching working class, poor, oppressed, and immigrant communities much worse than it is the middle class and the upper class. Until then, we shouldn't go back to life as normal.
And I certainly concur with that one. So, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we close on this? What about you personally? Are you doing okay?
I mean, I'm doing okay, but like, the more empathetic you are as a person, it's kind of hard to do okay personally while other people suffer. I can tell you, for example, my mom, who works with the Board of Ed as an administrator, she had possibly COVID-19, but she, at the beginning of the crisis, went to stay in the suburbs of Atlanta. And when she tried to seek medical care, after experiencing respiratory symptoms, they told her, go home and self-quarantine. We have no tests, right? So like, that's something we need. We need tests and a vaccine. We need science. And we have an anti-science president telling people to inject themselves with bleach and
How ridiculous that was. I mean,
and going backwards. My father is a 81-year-old person who goes to dialysis 3 times a week.
wow.
He's told me at his particular dialysis center, at least 20 people from there have passed away since the beginning of this crisis. So personally, when people ask me, how are you doing? I go, I'm okay. But I want to be good.
My reply is usually I'm breathing.
At the end of the day, I can't be good unless everyone else is good. And that's the spirit we need to take up, because we live in these like isolated bubbles in our society, right? Like, I'm in my apartment, you're in your apartment, you're in your house, and like, we're viewing each other with suspicion, when at the end of the day we have more in common than we have differences. And we need to lean on those commonalities to come together to say, listen, we can make the world a better place only if we try, only if we overcome these divisions of race, gender, sexuality, and the nationality, especially in the United States. Because a lot of people say, well, if you don't like it here, go back to where you came from. Well, I'm Guyanese, technically. I came here when I was 16, but I've been living in New York for the most part. Ever since then, I came here post 9/11. I went through the New York City blackout. I watched the transit strike happen. I was here for Hurricane Sandy, and I'm here for this, and I'm not going anywhere. So the question is, like, are you going to join me and others in making the world a better place? Because if you send me anywhere else, that's all I'm going to do there anyway.
That's one of the things that I when I look back over my life, that I'm glad that I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up not far from where we are now, and this is such a diverse community and a diverse borough, that I'm glad I wasn't born anywhere else where it wouldn't have been that way. So I can appreciate other people's cultures and other people's races. I went to high school in Bedford-Stuyvesant, so an old white guy going to a mostly black high school was different for me, but I made a lot of friends there, and that's the way it should have been. So I hope more and more people uh, are more conscious of what's going on. One of the things that my wife and I were involved with the Chinese Workers Group, which is a group in Lower Manhattan, and there were a group of people that were evicted from their homes. So it was basically a Chinese culture. and they went on 2 hunger strikes. One of them during the coldest period of the winter. There were 80-year-old people in tents outside demonstrating to get back into their home. And I was amazed and angered by the number of people that would just walk by, not even look at these people, not even read the signs, not accept any of the paperwork flyers that were being given out. It just made me more and more angry.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's like something especially we have to look at even in movement spaces, right? There are issues of what people would call for shorthand privilege that you need to look at. So like when people talk about healthcare workers, for example, right? They talk about nurses and doctors. They don't talk about the custodial staff and the other support staff within the hospital that are not only risking their lives, sometimes they too are dying and dying at disproportionate rates. People talk about teachers on the front lines. No one talks about the paraprofessionals who've been dying at a disproportionate rate. So like within whatever group that's negatively affected by a disparity, to use Bernie Sanders' term, you need to look at the disparities within the disparities as well to
yes,
see, right, like how these different parts of social movements and classes and races interact with each other, and who's coming out on top and who's coming out at the bottom. Because at the end of the day, these groups are being pushed into competition with each other. And it's not enough to say that, oh, well, it's a no-win situation, we're all losers. No. The people who win are the people who live, and the people who lose are the people who die. And we need people to say that, no, I'm not going to say, oh, these people are immigrants, they're people of color, I don't have to worry about them. We have to realize that in the long run, we share common interests.
yes, that's true. There is the healthcare workers, the people that go in and take care of mostly elderly people or people that are unable to fend for themselves. And there was a bill passed last year uh, to pay these people. They work 24-hour shifts at times,
Mm-hmm.
but they only get paid for 13 hours.
Right.
And there was a bill passed in the House and in the legislation in the state house, and the governor refused to sign it. He vetoed it on New Year's Eve. These people work hard. Most of them are immigrants. It's a split between Hispanics and Asians, and some of them are hurt because they're left alone to take care of these people,
Yeah.
but they don't get paid the kind of money that they should be paid.
And a lot of it, there's a lot of wage theft and abuse that happens in these workplaces as well, right? And we, at this time, right, we're talking about people who cannot go outside, home health aides, right? And people who do this kind of care work, domestic workers, are really essential workers. But
Yes,
because they're not employed directly by the government, because they oftentimes have to work under the table because they don't have papers, they don't have the protection they need. And that bill would have taken things at least one step in the right direction. And it's very telling about who Governor Cuomo is that he won't sign it. I'd just like to add, like, there's a lot of Caribbean immigrants as well who work as home health aides, some of whom I know personally, and they talk about these struggles with the families they work with, right? Like oftentimes the families they work with would say, we're progressives, we're liberals, we never vote Republican. But if you turn it around to how they treat the domestic workers in their homes, the question then becomes like, where is your progressivism when it comes to ensuring this person who works for you has decent wages?
right. I've given up on the two-party politics. I currently belong to the Green Party, uh, and we have to get people willing to vote for Greens because of our platform. Um, but that's another story. We can talk about that at a
Yeah,
different
you
time.
don't want to get me started on the election. As it is right now, I have one group of people who see me as a sectarian and another group of people who see me as an opportunist based on just talking about perspectives for November 2020. But I do agree with the general message coming from people like Michael Moore and Cornel West that in November, at the end of the day, we're presented with the choice between neoliberalism and neo-authoritarianism. And it's important to make a choice. But if you do say that you're going to pick the neoliberal candidate, you say he's a neoliberal candidate, he's a sexist, he's palled around with segregationists,
Hmm.
um, and Biden's political biography is too long to list, unfortunately, with his misdeeds. But for people who are saying vote Biden, you have to be clear and honest about what Biden is. And basically, at the end of the day, you're not picking someone who's making the world better. You're pretty much picking your opponent, right? Like, do you want to fight Trump, who is mobilizing right-wing protesters against lockdown orders? Or do you want to fight Biden, who is doddering neoliberal?
You have to ask the question, how did these people get to the positions? Particularly, and again, I'm not in the Democratic Party, but Democrats were noted to be the party of the people.
Yeah.
Well, how do you put someone like Biden in a spot that he's in now? Just because Bernie Sanders leans to social democracy? I mean, it's crazy. It tells you where the leadership in both parties are in this country, and we need to change that.
I mean, I think what it does, it shows that there's a certain fear amongst the Democratic Party and the general political establishment of people coming into their own, right? Of people trying to say, society is messed up, we want to fix it, we're going to take it into our own hands. And I wasn't a supporter of Bernie's campaign, but I did support that energy that was within the campaign. I did support people becoming mobilized, and you could see that it scared the Democratic Party. And you can see them, that's how they circled around Biden. But the other part of it is that there is, at least what I feel, an instinctual perspective and understanding amongst certain parts of the population that have rallied around Biden. It is significant that there's places where Biden had very little campaign machinery, and he beat Bernie overwhelmingly, and the other candidates. So I think people kind of like see what's going on in politics, right? They see that when Biden entered the race a year later than almost everyone else, all of a sudden he's the front runner, and that the president of the United States is so scared of his candidacy that he nearly gets himself impeached, coming up with schemes to get rid of Biden. So people are like, okay, they're saying electability, maybe this is the guy. And I do think at the end of the day, we should respect the perspectives of people saying vote for this person, vote for that. But I feel like November 2020 is a referendum on Trumpism. It's a referendum on Trump's time in office. And that is what should organize and be the framework for us coming up with a position for November 2020 to say specifically, we need to get rid of Trump. Another 4 years of this cannot stand, because we've been on this call for about half an hour. And in that half an hour, I couldn't even tell you the number of things the Trump regime has done to remake the government and to attack people in just the 4 years they've been in.
Yeah. Well, again, we'll talk about party politics at a different time.
That's a whole different topic.
Yeah, right. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and please keep us updated on the route, because I'd like to promote the route in some way so people come out. Even if they don't want to go in the streets, they can bang pots from the window and applaud the people driving by in the Caravan.
Right. So we do have the starting points in place, and I'll be able to share that with you over email. And as the routes are finalized, I'll be sure to put you in touch with the different borough leaders who can have other people plug in to be part of this effort.
Well, again, I really appreciate it.
11 a.m. in Staten Island at the JFK 8 warehouse. If you go on our Facebook page, you'll see we've linked to Chris Smalls' event to help cross promote it there as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Robert. Stay in touch.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care now.